You're listening to the Business Communicators. And now your hosts, Austin Stepp and Thomas Bain.
Welcome into Season 5 of the Business Communicators. My name is Austin Staton, joined alongside my co-host, Thomas Bain, on the #1 business communications and marketing podcast in the world, and that's a verifiable fact. Thomas, I see you rocking some new merch this week, the rubber duck shirt. This is not a paid post, but I got to give you your flowers, man.
Hey, my brother reached out to me a long time ago saying, what's your thoughts on this? And the ultimate goal is to make people smile, give you confidence. It's actually a really comfortable shirt. It makes me smile, makes me feel good when I see it. Other people seem to like it. So we're kind of crawl, walk, run, and moving from there. Maybe one day we'll be on the Super Bowl.
Yeah, got to aim high, right? I mean, if you can drop $6 to $7 million on an ad, kudos to you. Or you can just hijack it like Beyonce and, drop an album, Texas Hold'em. On
number one country song going on right now.
Shout out Houston.
And it has been a while since we've recorded, and we haven't done our top 10 top favorite commercials of that. I'm actually trying to get some of the people who are the creative brands behind some of the ones we like to come speak on us. So that's been fun, to say the least.
Yeah, I think that would probably be more appropriate since we've kind of missed the
window of it. Yeah.
Reaction. But, kind of talking about some of those brand campaigns, I think would be fascinating. Obviously, Dove was a big winner. Temu was one of the most annoying ad campaigns that I think I've seen. There's been a lot of memes coming from that, and then there was some controversy as well. Some brands that were trying to capitalize on the Taylor Swift movement, outright ripping off TikTok creators. So there's been a lot of controversy surrounding that. So I'd be curious to hear what they have to say in the coming weeks.
And I also think that we're giving it enough time for the results to actually be in, because we've always talked about it. But yeah, the commercials are great.
What is ROI?
They truly drive sales? And you look at Dunkin' Donuts, and they're doing phenomenal. So
yeah, well, little plug right there, Dunkin'. But anyways, if you want to follow our work, just search @BizCommunicator on all the social platforms. We mostly post on LinkedIn and kind of let the other ones occasionally, but you can also find our work at thebusinesscommunicators.com. But Thomas, we've got a guest this week that I'm excited about. It's Josh Kail, who is a strategic communications and PR professional. He's been in the industry for over 20 years, focusing on AI, machine learning, data, blockchain, ads, crisis, all of this. And it's work with some very interesting brands, and really excited to have him on this week. So let's go ahead and bring Josh onto the stage. Josh, welcome to the Business Communicators. We're glad to have you.
Thank you. Good morning, afternoon, whatever time it may be, wherever you are.
Yeah, so if you're listening this, we hope you listen when the episode drops, which is 8 a.m. Eastern time on Monday, first episode of March. But Josh, for our listeners out there, kind of give them a little rundown of who you are, what you do, and what your background is.
Sure. Yeah, I've been working in strategic comms and PR for almost 20 years now, primarily in high-tech B2B spaces across the board, from satellite tech to ad tech, martech, and a lot of work in AI, data, and all things in between, from the most mundane of master data management to some really cutting edge AI aspects, from federated learning, decentralized AI, machine learning, neuroscience, etc. And for companies from small startups to multinational enterprises, really digging into that. So I've been working with data since about 2015, 2016, and just seeing the evolution of that across the way.
I think it's always fascinating when we talk data and AI, and it's something that we have, kind of touched on a little bit on this podcast, but haven't really dove fully deep into it. So really curious to kind of make that a focal point of the conversation today. And, I want to start off on a few key things. So obviously, late 2022, ChatGPT and OpenAI just absolutely blew up. And, since then, we've seen other platforms that have kind of emerged. And the one that has really, kind of drawn a lot of question marks over the past few weeks is Gemini, which was launched by Google. And, there's been a lot of blowback from it, whether it's just flat out getting history wrong, with its image creation, or comparing the former FCC chair to Hitler and saying that they're very, very similar, and who actually impacted the world more negatively. It says, it's too tough to tell. There seems to be a lot of political biases in place. And Google, kind of came out pretty quickly and said, we got this wrong. Nate Silver, who has his weekly newsletter, came out this week and said Google should just, scrap Gemini and start over. So I'm curious, kind of from your perspective, maybe not necessarily on Gemini itself, but what kind of role does AI and these chatbots that are supposed to maybe make our lives easier, what role does it play in for us as communications professionals?
Yeah, it's interesting. So one of the first aspects of AI I worked in was with chatbots back in like 2016, and it flourished from there. I think fundamentally the problem when we talk about AI is AI doesn't mean anything, right? In the sense that because it's a technology that's birthed out of industry rather than science, it skips a large aspect of the scientific method, right? And the first part of the scientific method is define your terms. So AI for any company can be machine learning, generative learning, descent, all this type of stuff. So when it goes out into the market, we have all these expectations over it, but it doesn't actually hit any of them. And so the big split I see, like regardless of the type of AI going into it, is the AI that's built for behind the scenes, for helping automated processes work better, for helping coding, analytics, all that stuff in the back end. And then there's the consumer facing stuff, which is like the ChatGPT or Gemini, where we're seeing it. We're like, oh, cool. I can make any picture I want, or I can do a video, or I can fake a voice, or whatever it is. There's a huge problem in that we seem to have dropped the Turing test out of the conversation for all that front stuff. And that's one of the most important aspects for what's going to be successful or not. Because as consumers and humans in particular, our brains are fast enough to pick up the little stuff. So if you develop AI that's consumer facing in a corporation with the goal of product, and not only with the goal of product, but the goal of a specific product, right? So normally, if you're developing any sort of thing in the lab, you're developing it for the purpose of what happens. All right, here's what the response is. Here's how we can use it. Even in Google, which bought up all the data scientists and had them play muck. The goal was, all right, we want to do this. We want to have AI-based search, or we want to have content creation or whatever. And so then you build for that goal and hope it works. And then maybe it goes through beta testing or whatever, and it gets launched onto the market. That's where the problem is, because there's no real testing. There's no full understanding of how that AI is going to evolve over a period of time within, a glass jar to see where it comes out of. And then when there's inevitable errors in it, it looks horrible.
Yeah,
and
biases.
And that negativity from a user base impacts not only the consumer side of AI, it impacts all AI adoption.
I've been playing in AI. I applaud your first statement about really we're overusing the term since 2012, 2013. Right. With ad buying of, hey, I need to find people who are buying a Ford truck, who's in the market for a truck. And granted, there were a lot of no real bumpers on it because you're ad buying. It's the wild, wild west. 90% of your spend is being wasted on stuff that doesn't matter. So you got to write one out of 100 times. Cool.
Right.
But then you read the articles about the bot that was released on Twitter when it was still called Twitter that became racist in like 10 seconds because human interactions were just, let's see how much we can mess with it.
Right.
But then now you're starting to see kind of the pre-built biases of, as Austin said, the historical figures who are worse than the FCC chairman, who what a Nazi soldier looks like. What kind of guidelines, rails should the government step in? Should the government not step in? Should we put in place to kind of prevent some of these rogue things, since we are not using the scientific method?
Right. I mean, it depends if the cause of that is intentional or unintentional, right? Because you have programmatic bias, and programmatic bias in the development of AI could be, a racist developer or a, politically leaning developer with a strong intent. I want my AI to go in this direction. Could be the unintentional algorithmic bias in which, that goes back into like an observed experiment is impacted, right? The person who's creating the code, or the people that are creating their code, have innate biases because they're human that they can't escape. And so those may come in as little seeds of this direction or that direction and evolve over time. You can't have a policy to stop that, right? Because it's humanity, it's who we are. We all have them to some degree or another. So it's weird. Like I don't know what a policy would look like. A policy, like a fundamentally, successful policy would be, you need to have this go in this, vacuum sealed environment for X amount of time, get all this stuff out, have an understanding before you launch it. That's not really realistic as a policy. We can't force companies to do that. I think this is where that argument of like industry can self-regulate. All right, show it, right? Stop rushing to market. Stop putting stuff out that it has the the razzle dazzle, like, oh, that's cool type of thing, and then puts everyone back, because the moment it fails on people, it's less and less time before they adopt it. And that impacts, like I was saying before, the non in your face stuff, because, well, if this doesn't work and you're really pushing this forward, why am I going to trust AI to, run the automation of, making sure vendors are being paid, or, understanding, coding at a deep level that doesn't screw me over in some degree. So there's that responsibility there, but it's also, we're in a very much, let's see what you got now type of market. And then with Google in particular, it's highly competitive right now with ChatGPT and Microsoft and everything like that. Like if they don't come out with something, all of a sudden they're not kings of tech like they used to be.
Yeah.
So that's the risk there. And I think we all kind of suffer a little bit from it.
I think one of the things that I'm concerned of is AI in journalism and the role that it plays. And I remember it was probably 6 to 8 years ago, maybe, the Associated Press came out and said, they weren't going to be covering and sending stringers to, certain athletic events anymore. Mm-hmm. And these AI bots or whatever would start generating basic recaps that would appear in newspaper, like, college A beat college B 5-4. Here's kind of what happened just based on the box score. And so, you read the stories and it's pretty bland. It's not that engaging, but it's there. And it sucks for these smaller schools that aren't big enough to have actual reporters go to the games. Right. But it's just, with newsroom cutbacks, it kind of made sense. My concern now is, one, we have a lot of layoffs going on in journalism. We've seen recently the Washington Post, the LA Times. This past week, there was Vice. So many newsrooms have been impacted. But we're starting to see AI more and more in the newsroom, and I think this is problematic. There's a company out there called BNN Breaking. I think it's based in Hong Kong, and it's started by an entrepreneur in the U.S. who has, I guess, a checkered past. He's had some run-ins with, criminal activity, fraud, that kind of thing. During the pandemic, his company bought B&O Breaking on Twitter, which already had like a large established consumer base. He changed the name to BNN Breaking. Ultimately, Twitter suspended it. And this is all before Elon Musk purchased it. I was not familiar with BNN Breaking until the company that I worked for, probably last October. We sent out a press release. And in our Google alerts and all of our Cision alerts, this Yahoo story popped up, and basically this BNN Breaking story got aggregated and pulled into, content aggregation platforms like Google News and Yahoo News. And I read the story, and it was just so wrong. I mean, there's of course journalists that, maybe get things wrong, and we can go to them and ask for them to correct the record. And generally they will, they'll put an editor's note. I tried to find a contact for this person, and the more and more that I dove in, I realized this quote unquote journalist has written 600 stories in the past 2 hours. Yeah. Everything from rugby going on in India to energy transactions. Right. So it was very clear that this was AI. The more that I dug into this, I realized, oh, wait, there's a lot of stories out there where people are complaining about this company, BNN Breaking, putting false information out there. And the problem is it's getting picked up by these news aggregators. So there's no checks and balances. And these companies are driving revenue through clicks. They don't care about the news or anything like that. So for me, I see that as a huge red flag for misinformation, manipulation moving forward. what are you seeing on that? And is there any sort of like regulation that can take place? I mean, is there something we can do to protect ourselves, especially when, the consequences and the stakes for this kind of news could
Yeah.
be particularly high?
It's interesting. So there's a gut reaction to all AI of AI is going to steal my job, right? And it's a natural one, and probably will happen eventually. And it's when I was working, the clients I worked in, like depending on the sector, you could see a flow of like AI is going to take my job, advertising industry. AI is going to take my job, legal industry. AI is, so you can see it like go from industry to industry. This fear, and it's a justified fear. But this goes back to the quality of work, right? What's coming out right now from that type of generative AI is good, but not good enough to be unedited, untouched, or unfixed. So, right, when you're talking about like a mass blast like that, it's going to be bad, without question.
See, we know that,
right?
But does the common person, are they going to take that?
So this is where it gets really interesting, right? Because it's not about targeted misinformation. It's not about intent. It's not about AI being good at that point. When you're blasting out stuff at that multitude from multiple sources, different purposes and stuff like that, fundamentally, we're changing what any of us accept to be truth or not, or what any of us accept to be what we take in or not. Even the most, well-worn, hyper-vigilant fact checker, right? I annoy all of my Facebook friends because every time they post something, I'm like, actually, blah, 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 right? Super annoying. It's exhausting. And you can't do that all the time. You can't do that at the speed that AI can do it. So it's creating an ecosystem where it's not about trusting the right data or not. It's just everything's out there and you either trust it or you don't, and it will break you down. That's the long-term detriment of this going unchecked.
You hit the nail on the head. So you're a PR person. Austin's a media relations person. I used to be a PR marketing person. We understand that whoever controls the media, controls the messaging going out, controls the populace. And so how would you recommend us or our listeners to help understand where can they go to get the true information? Where do they need to go point? Because you just said Facebook. We know that more news breaks on Facebook and in YouTube and in Google than it does in reputable news sources.
Right. Well, I think one aspect, it's a little unfair, right? Because from working in PR, like if I have a ad tech client, I read all the ad tech trades, right? Every morning I spend an hour reading whatever the industry is. It's not one source. There's no one source. So you really have to read multiple sources of varying approaches in order to get an understanding of it. I don't know if I agree on the who controls the media controls the truth to that degree. I know you, yeah, but but I don't think anyone controls. It's a very risky thing to talk about the media in that capacity.
And when I say media, I'm not just talking like news broadcasting. I'm talking about marketing media. So whether it's the social media, whether it's the phone calls, text messages, etc. So
I mean, what I want to, this has been something that I've been pushing for the work with Cambridge and everything, but like there is no media cabal from a journalist perspective.
Yeah.
Right? There's this belief, regardless of the political leanings, that there's like a group of editors that get together in Switzerland and they're like, here's what our stories are. Like the individual journalists and reporters that any of us work with on a daily or weekly or monthly basis legitimately care about what they write about, and they're doing their efforts in order to cover it. Now, the business implementation of advertising on top of that and the editor pressures and all that do sway like what stories run and what stories don't, but not to that degree. So I want to make that very clear. Like there is no the media, right? But it's more about the flooding than the content, right? If you take anything and blast it in front of your face long enough, regardless of what your initial opinions or thoughts were, it's going to converted to some degree. But like even with the Facebook, right? This is the argument of, is Facebook a media company or an aggregator, right? And what is their role within that?
Yeah. Well, I mean, to me, I think that's kind of fascinating when you look at, you just mentioned Facebook, but I'll mention Twitter, or X or whatever you want to call it. But I think it was 2016, 2017. They actually changed their classification in the Apple, the App Store, from social media to news. And, love him or hate him, one of the things that I like about X now is the community notes feature. If there's blatant misinformation out there, you will see a notification that shows why that tweet is wrong. It doesn't solve all the problems, but for the people that take the time to, ask questions, I have friends that ask this about the election, because we heard a lot about this in 2020, the fake news this, fake news that. We heard about it in 2016. And what I always stress to my friends is, you need to follow a lot of journalists on social media that cover it. You need to cover, don't just follow, like, if you're a Republican, don't just follow Fox News reporters. If you're a Democrat, don't just follow MSNBC reporters. Follow the middle, follow both sides, follow politicians on both sides as well. I think the more you can be informed as a voter, the more you can make informed decisions. And so that's just kind of my take on this whole. But Thomas, I see you want.
I mean, it's the problem is human nature, right? Because doing that is effective. It's a lot of work. I can't. I have teams under me, I can't even get all of them to read their stuff every morning. Like, I can't get them to look at their industry news every morning, and that's their job, right?
Yeah, true statement.
And you see an impact on it, because they just don't understand what they're talking about, or they're a little weaker on those subjects. So getting someone to do that, like, even if you subscribe to a newspaper, people subscribe to one or two, right? Or they go to their one site and they spend whatever time on it. But it's a major use of time to do that. And so I don't know if that's the realistic aspect of it. I mean, the real solution here is be more responsible with AI development and launching, in terms of what it can do realistically and how you're selling it out, and take more time to develop it, I think, for a lot of these companies. And for the companies that are buying AI, like, there was a report a couple months ago about how CEOs are putting AI purchasing at the top of their agenda, making their companies AI forward, which is a ridiculous statement to make, because what does that mean? What it means is they're using AI as a marketing tool and not as a business tool, right? They can say they have AI, it's implemented in their business system, and now they seem, front and center in terms of what's next.
Yeah.
They don't know what it's doing necessarily, or negative or positive impact it's having on a meaningful level. And they're going to rely on the AI provider to tell them, here are the KPIs that we hit, and here's the metrics and all that other stuff. So that's where it kind of gets this ingrained into the system of mediocre is enough. And it shouldn't be for a technology that has so much potential, because the flip side of all of this is, eventually AI is going to get to the point where it will be able to write really great content, and it will be able to do all these things that are promised for it. And it's still going to hurt, right? It's still going to be like, that doesn't feel right to have a non-human presence in it, but it's going to be at that level of quality and accuracy if it's given the time to evolve in the proper way.
You stole one of my 2024 predictions, is that AI is more of a marketing buzzword than it is an actual source. Whether it's
to when blockchain launched.
Yeah, whether we are talking about it in our media careers, or whether we're talking about it in Canva or any other profession, it's, hey, we have AI. Why? You don't need it.
Yeah.
I'm waiting for the Walmart store to say, hey, we have AI. You mentioned something about Cambridge Analytica, and yes, we record in the United States, and it's going into an election year. We're actually in the middle of
when you listen to this,
when
you listen to this, Super Tuesday is tomorrow. So
yes, and so when I talk about controlling the media, you mentioned Cambridge Analytica, and they're probably the most famous about identifying certain segments to sway elections, whether it's Brexit, whether it's the Great Hack. And we've actually talked about the Great Hack and had guests on here about that. What is your involvement, as you mentioned, Cambridge Analytica, with that?
Yeah, so from October of 2016 till March of 2018, I was the senior manager on the agency side for Cambridge Analytica. We were brought on to do the PR media relations for their commercial side. So none of the politics, talking about like helping, brands apply the same techniques to help target their audience. What it turned into was that, and then once a month crisis relations from the election on with them, and it was a very interesting period of my professional life because at the time when I started work, when I came on in that October, I just started with the agency, and there was another manager in place who very much wanted to be transitioned out. Like you could, the meetings I had with like just drained. And the way he described, when I first met with him, the way he described it was like, well, they use traditional, market data, and they combine it with millions of data points on every American that they claim they have, and they use psychological analysis to cross-reference with the typical demographic data in order to create targeted ads for the individual and then distribute it to them that way. And the response, I was like, yeah, that's kind of gross. And he's like, yeah. And he's like, oh, and by the way, they work with Trump. I'm like, ah. So it wasn't a great, personally, it wasn't a great introduction to it. It wasn't until election night of 2016 that I really started working with them. And that was, I got a text from that other manager at 11 at night. So after everything was said and done, saying they want to put out a press release congratulating Trump, which was not the mood I was in to write anything. So I got my roommate's bottle of Jameson, and through text and emails and a lot of whiskey, we wrote out that press release and sent it out.
And in today's term, you could have just had AI do it for you and been clear.
Yeah, I would never do that. But yeah, I mean, I'd be free and clear of it, and it would probably everything would have happened the way it happened with AI writing it as well. It may have been a little more bombastic with AI, but in that case, at least, inaccuracies wouldn't have mattered.
Our guest last episode that we had, we were talking about PR firms getting sued for their clients' misbehavior. Right. And she made a very good comment about not everybody deserves. Well, does every good company deserve PR? And I was going to see what your take was on it.
So, I mean, that was the personal struggle I had throughout the entire time with them, to the point where, like, the only people that knew I represented them for the most part was my wife, and I think at some point I told my parents. But it was not. I didn't tell any anecdotes or anything about them to anyone until months after I stopped working with them. It's a hard line to draw, right? Because the one thing I tell clients, I told Cambridge this, and I tell clients since this, is like, there's no such thing as PR agency client confidentiality in the sense of the legal world. So, like, don't tell us if you're doing anything illegal, because we'll report you because it's illegal. And with Cambridge's account, it's interesting because, like, I have to look back and think, like, well, what was the mentality at the time? And from our perspective, the narrative, and it went unchecked and unchallenged up until the Channel 4 documentary came out in that March, was there was a lot of anger at the election of Trump, right? One might say a majority of anger at the election of Trump. And then the day after that happened, we come out with a press release saying it was because of us. It's because of Cambridge Analytica. And then all of a sudden that anger, now we have someone to focus that anger on, right? And so from that point, like that week following, there was a mix, right? The first bunch was like, how did they get it and everyone else get it wrong? And then the second batch was, what were they doing to do this? How did they do this? And then it was they saw Facebook data and they did all this other stuff. For all this time, the narrative that we got from Cambridge was that anger thing, right? They're just angry. They're looking for someone to blame. We use Facebook data just like we use all the other, data pools that you can buy from. We had this relationship with Dr. Kogan when he was working on the ocean stuff, and everything's on the up and up. And they're just, coming at us. And every time an article ran, it was accusation, but then there's nothing backing it up. It was just like, we heard that. And so it became this thing of, with a client, at what point is that enough to drop a client? Because on a political level, I don't agree with them. I didn't have any power to do it anyway. It wasn't my agency. But like, if you politically disagree with them, is that enough to drop a client? Probably not, right? That's not good business, not the fundamentals of, the U.S. government, U.S. system of government. And so that wasn't enough. And then as things go on, it was just more and different accusations and angrier people and whatnot. But there was never that turning point until the Channel 4 documentary came out. And when the Channel 4 segments came out, that's when we started talking about, all right, we have to get rid of them. And we were going to give them another month after that. And then some emails came out with the rather racist language in the emails. And I'm like, look, we can't, they're done. We can't do this anymore. And then it went from a month to, all right, that Wednesday, we're done. And that was the process of it.
You bring up a good point, and about writing a press release right after it happens and things along those lines. And we've discussed on here whether it's through an ad agency where the head honcho says something he shouldn't say, whether it's a PR person being in the media. And as a profession, we work behind our customer.
Right.
It's a bad day when we are in front of our customer. We are the news story, not our customer's news story. What are some, if you had to go back, what are some advice you would give to not drop the press release the day after the election that in essence pissed off half the country?
Well, they're right. Who's the target audience for this? I don't think they cared about pissing off half the country. I think that press release, in retrospect, one, knowing all the wrongs they actually did, which the data stuff, I'm going to put pretty low on that list when you look at the stuff that they're accused of. But yeah, I would say the press release was a good idea for their goals. The press release was to bolster up their political presence in the U.S. market and to expand it into the commercial. And so what they were doing with that press release was saying, look, we did this for the impossible candidate. We can do this for your candidate. We can do this for your company. And they got a lot from it. What the mistake was, and they knew this, and they would never have told us or anyone that, right? Because of all those skeletons and because of this big secret that they were holding and just trying to get away with the deniability, that's where it came crumbling down. Because if they didn't put the press release out, they didn't push hard on that front, they probably could have still gotten away with sales and marketing and stuff like that behind the scenes and been that like covert company that SEL Group was and that Cambridge was up until that point, and expanded profitably, particularly in the political sector. It might have been harder on the consumer side. And then when everything hit with Facebook and all that other stuff, they probably would have survived because no one would have really known who they were. It would have been clouded in this mystery and a bunch of other factors that we can talk about. But when I look at Cambridge, it's not really a data story. So I should start out with this. Fundamentally, I don't believe what their claims were in terms of capability from the tech side of things. And I think there's a lot of evidence to show that they didn't really work. I don't think the Trump campaign hired them for tech purposes. And I don't think that's really what they were selling when you look at the greater aspect of what they're doing. And I say that because, right, Ted Cruz, his campaign spent way more money and more time on Cambridge before Trump brought them on. And won the Iowa caucus, right? That was a big moment. And everyone said, oh, within the campaign, right? Cambridge was a main course of that. He didn't win anything after that. And they got fired. And then they got brought on to Trump campaign June 10th, 2016. And they had the data backing of what they had for Ted Cruz, but that's still not targeted enough for it.
Yeah, and we talk about humans and things like that, and changing on a dime. And I'm going to try to bring this back to business communications. And I know because of Cambridge Analytica, certain data aggregators, information behind the scenes of people have changed their names of companies, because there's 6 or 7 different data brokers globally that do know a lot about you. What are some of the things that you are watching as we go forward in public relations, in media relations, in marketing in general? Because stories are coming out fast and furious, and you probably read as much or as us, and probably more than most people do, on just what's going on. Where do you see, taking AI out of it, where do you see public relations, media relations going?
So public PR hasn't really changed. Like, the tools that we use have changed.
Correct.
It's fundamentally, right, psychology. It's fundamentally understanding the people you're talking to. Yep. Whether that's pitching a journalist, whether that's the end reader, whether that's the client. And at its purest form, that's really where it needs to be focused. So understanding how best to communicate with the individual you're working with, and working with them in a media relations perspective to create a story that is mutually beneficial, that retains the core message of what that client wants to get out, but in a way that doesn't sound like advertising or shilling on the journalist way, and in a way that's interesting for the community. And over time, right, it's that snowball effect. Over time, consistently pushing out. That's what makes the motion going forward. A lot of what I've seen, and maybe I'm a purist in that sense, a lot of what I've seen in PR in terms of the evolution hasn't really been evolution, it's been expansion, right? All right, now we do social media in the agency, or now we do some light marketing, and now we do some influencer stuff, right? It's expanding it out to create a wider berth of services, so that the stuff that we do that nobody understands, and they know they have to, but they don't really get the fundamentals of it. Now there's a lot of stuff there, and some of it they can, and some of it they can't, and it justifies it. It's a business move. But fundamentally, like, PR is understanding who you're representing, understanding who you're speaking to, understanding who you want to reach. And that's really it.
Yeah, it's also about relationships. Relationships matter. Fostering those matter. So all of the above. But Josh, I've really enjoyed this conversation, especially I'm a political science major, actually, so kind of on the poli-sci nerd side, and this has been great for our listeners out there that maybe they kind of want to get in touch with you, or maybe kind of follow your updates. What is the best way for them to find you?
I would say, ironically, LinkedIn is probably the best place to put it. I post a lot about my thoughts about PR industry, from relationships and the importance of it, to the business, to AI and beyond.
Yeah, we'll definitely link Josh's LinkedIn profile below. So if you're listening on your phone right now, open up the show notes, scroll down a little bit, click on Josh's name, and you'll find his information there. But Josh, Kail, we appreciate you for joining us on the Business Communicators this week.
Thank you for having me.
You're listening to the Business Communicators.
Thomas, I think that was a fun conversation. Really, kind of like going into the the AI aspect, the the data analytics side, and I thought Josh had some really interesting takes.
I agree. And then, representing a client that kind of used some of it makes it a little bit interesting. And I know that when we were talking to him, he does not advocate saying who his clients was, but it's been long enough that company's been bankrupt that he felt comfortable saying a little bit. But yeah, to your point, it is the future, and it's something that you and I and all of our listeners need to at least read something about it once a month, once a week of this is what AI is doing. This is where the challenges are coming in. The behind the scenes, and I'm trying to figure out whether to write an article for Business Communicators or something, talking about what New York's doing to Facebook right now and the lawsuits that they're just starting to push through, and to see what happens from there. So
yeah, I was gonna say it should be interesting to follow, especially that litigation, the testimonies that are going to be happening. But one thing that I will say, kind of wrapping up, the conversation with Josh is, he mentioned obviously the election, and I kind of want to call back really quickly to 2021 episode that we recorded, and I think it was January 11th. It was right after the January 6th issue in Washington D.C. But we actually spoke about Champion Management, which is a Dallas-based agency, and they had released, or I guess issued, a press release on behalf of Pizza Inn CEO at the time, Brandon Solano. They had released a press release on January 5th, so a day before the insurrection at the Capitol, and I remember reading it that night on January 5th, like, what the hell is this? Like, what agency, one, thought this was a good idea to issue, and two, what company thought this was a good idea to issue? And then everything that we saw happen on January 6th, I mean, we reached out to the PR firm and we're like, what the hell were you guys thinking? And, to be fair, they gave us a statement and they ultimately told us that they parted ways with, the company. But, and they told us in retrospect that we wish we would have pushed stronger on this and said no to this press release. So this is just my word of advice. Be cautious when it comes around, these political activities. You don't always have to insert yourself or your brand or your company into the headlines.
And we mentioned that also, I think, during one of the recordings during COVID, about how many emails you're getting from a company that you've done business with 15 years ago.
Yeah.
Hey, we really care about you. And then we also mentioned it about the Ukraine-Russia thing, where people are wanting to put out press releases and you're like...
Well, I mean, you go back to that. Obviously, Black Lives Matter was a huge thing. DEI was a huge thing. I think Ukraine, Russia was really kind of the last time it happened. And I think one of the problems that I had specifically on that was, I remember it showed up in my time hop the other day, so I specifically remember it. IBC International released a statement on that, and they didn't release a statement condemning the invasion or war crimes that were going on. They stressed that we allow truth to come through. And they basically were calling for Putin, to follow the IBC Global Ethics Board. And I'm like, how about you call out him not following like the Geneva Convention instead of the IBC Board or Code of Conduct? Like, come on.
And we've also talked about Tucker Carlson and being the one reporter.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
Wishing I had being able to bet my life savings on how many reputable news sources have also requested information.
Yeah, I love his comment. Nobody wants to interview him, and it's like all these producers have like, hey, I represent ABC News. Yeah, we've made multiple like daily requests, and then even the Russian like press corps or whatever was like, no, we've received hundreds of requests a day from the US. This is just the only one we're granted. And it's like,
and pulling the green curtain back behind what we talk about, we were like, I wonder if any news stations, and you're like, what benefit do they have? And I'm like, not reporters, the whole news station putting it out there. And you're like, oh, fair point.
Yeah. Well, anyways, fun conversation. Be sure to follow Josh on LinkedIn. We'll leave his information below in the show notes. But Thomas, it's been fun getting to chat with you as always on the Business Communicators podcast. And if you want to follow our work, just search at Biz Communicator on all the social platforms. Really, we're primarily on LinkedIn. I think that's the place to go. You can also go to our website, thebusinesscommunicators.com. But Thomas, any parting thoughts?
Just keep following us. I'd like to welcome all of our new followers and downloads that happened in the last 3 weeks. It was like, oh, okay. And to that point, reach out to us, Thomas at the Business Communicators, Austin at the Business Communicators, about any sort of ideas, speaker topics, because we are always looking for it. And while we have our specific sets of marketing communications, it's a big, broad subject. and they all play in the same sandbox. And so we might miss something along those lines.
And we don't need like an insane presentation or anything like that. Like, we're just about having conversations and picking the brains of, the experts in our field. I think that's, to me, the value that I get out of this podcast, being able to speak with some incredible people, to hear their insights, on things that we nerd out about.
Yes.
And we nerd out about a lot of stuff in this industry. So if you like to nerd out too, hit us up. Let us know.
Yes.
We'd love to have you as a guest on the podcast. But on behalf of our guest this week, I'm Josh Kail, my co-host Thomas Bain. My name's Austin Staton. See you soon. Take care, everyone.
You've been listening to the Business Communicators. If you haven't done so already, be sure to subscribe to our podcast on iTunes and leave us a 5-star review.